So, yeah, is it your first time here in Sofia?
I've been here many years ago. I was a university student back then, and it's very nice to be back here again. Yeah.
So, did you come today?
Yes, I arrived this morning actually.
Okay. I hope that you have a little bit time to enjoy, maybe after our nice event, a little bit the city. And I'm really happy to have you here. And now the stage is yours.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. Allow me to say it's been such a pleasure for me, such a true pleasure to be here. I arrived this morning, and ever since then, every moment has been a joy, has been a pleasure. I have met very beautiful souls, beautiful minds. I have met several Bulgarian journalists, Bulgarian readers, sometimes just walking on the streets, meeting with the people, just passing by. Lots of women readers, and every moment of, today, since early morning, has been very full, very rich, and a real joy for me. So I do thank you for that hospitality, and I want you to know that it's really a pleasure for me to be with you tonight, this evening. I would like to start a little bit by talking about my background, my past a little bit, how I started writing, and my inner personal journey, if I may. I started writing at the age of 8, but that was not because I wanted to become a novelist. That was not because I wanted to become a writer, and definitely was not because I wanted to sign books one day. As a matter of fact, I didn't know such a possibility existed. I didn't know one could become a writer. I didn't know one could become a novelist. There were no writers or artists around me, so there were no role models that I imitated in that sense. Basically, I started writing because I felt this almost existential need to dream, to imagine, and to move beyond the box that I found myself in. I was a very lonely child, and books were my best friends. Perhaps they were my only friends for a very long time. And that's how everything started. I was raised by a single mother, a single working feminist mother, a divorcee. And that was very unusual in 1970s Ankara, Turkey. In the neighborhood where I grew up, in my early years, all the children belonged to large, extended families with siblings, cousins, nephews, and I would say perhaps a more patriarchal family structure. Whereas in my case, it was only my mother and me, and for a time, there was my grandmother. And these two women were quite different. Sometimes I see myself as the creation of these two very different women, of these two very different womanhoods. On the one hand was my mother, very well educated, westernized, modern, secular, and independent. And on the other hand was my grandmother, who was very superstitious, very spiritual, very irrational. And perhaps from my grandmother, I learned to find the gate into oral culture, into vocal culture, the heritage of stories, unwritten stories, tales, folk tales, lullabies, riddles, recipes, food, cuisine. All of these things that perhaps we cannot find in written culture, and perhaps written culture kind of looks down upon, but are very real, This heritage that women transfer from one generation to another, this heritage that grandmothers transfer to granddaughters. I have learned that from my grandmother, and from my mother I learned written culture. And in my work, in my novels, I like to combine these two worlds, the oral culture and the written culture. I like to combine these two different kinds of womanhood. In other words, I like to combine my mother and my grandmother in my novels. As I said, books were my best friends, and they, still are my very, very good friends. I believe we writers need to learn to become readers first. And the need to read, the hunger, the thirst for books needs to be very existential. It needs to be very essential. And then I started to write diaries. But because I thought my life was so boring, I did not want to write about the truth. So in my diaries, I wrote about people who didn't exist, and I wrote about things that did not happen. So from the very first moment onwards, even though I was writing diaries, in fact I was writing short stories, and in time that evolved into novels. Over time, I have lived in different countries, cities, and I've come to see my writing as an existential glue that keeps my pieces together. You know, it gives me a sense of continuity, of center, of coherence. I do believe that fiction connects us. I do believe that literature needs to go beyond national frontiers, religious frontiers, ethnic frontiers, class frontiers, gender frontiers. Because there are always these frontiers in front of us, invisible, but very strong. We keep bumping into them. And sometimes, hopefully, through art, we can build bridges over those frontiers. So I'm a firm believer in that possibility. But allow me to take a step back. You know, we're always being asked, why do we write? As writers, we're always asked this question. And I don't know if we really know the answer. I don't think we know the answer. But we pretend to know the answer. We always look at the past, at the moment we started to write, with a hindsight, in retrospect, and we find an explanation. But I doubt if that was the real explanation at that moment. What happens is, we write, sometimes without knowing why we write. But allow me to turn the question to you and to myself, and perhaps ask, why do we read? Do we need to read? Do we need books? Do we need stories? Do we need words? Do we need publishing? You know, in this age, this is the age of fast food. It's the age of technology. It's the age of internet. It's the age of Facebook and, of course, Twitter. How do we connect with this fast-growing, almost at a breakneck speed, you know, technology? How do I harmonize that with the slow rhythm of literature? Is that possible? I believe it's possible. And I believe precisely because we live in this fast-moving age, precisely because of that, we need those moments in which we stop, we look inside, we concentrate within, and make this personal journey that literature and books bring us. So to me, it's not a contradiction to talk about the need for books and to talk about technology at the same time. I do believe that they can coexist. And I do believe that we need books. First and foremost, we need books because books help us with our imagination. And I think everybody needs imagination. Whatever our profession, we could be a doctor. Doctors need imagination. If you want to find, for instance, an unusual illnesses, possible reasons, you need a lot of imagination. I think architects need imagination. I think businessmen need imagination. Businesswomen need imagination. Politicians need imagination. So it's not like only literary people who need imagination. We all need imagination. Sometimes in Turkey, I hear male, scholars, intellectuals, or journalists saying they don't have time for books or they don't have time for novels. Because in my country, like in many other countries, women read a lot. Women read novels a lot, and women keep the world of fiction alive. But men don't read as much. And my observation is usually women make the men around them read. So they give the book, if they like a book, they give it to their husbands, they give it to their boyfriends, they give it to their sons, fathers, and tell them to read. They say, you must read. I have many male readers who come to me and say, well, my wife read you first, and then I started reading. It happens. So we owe a lot to women readers. But that said, when I hear a male intellectual saying, I don't have time for novels because, it's a womanly thing, I always feel sad about that because for me, that person says, I don't need imagination. And I do believe that we all need imagination. Another reason why I think in this age we need novels is because of empathy. And I think stories help us to empathize, knowingly or unknowingly. Because when we read a story, the other person ceases to be an other. We start to see how much we have in common. We start to put ourselves in the shoes of another person and to look at the world from that angle. Stories make that possible. It's very interesting when a Jewish politician and a Palestinian politician get together. I don't think they listen to each other anymore. I don't think they even hear each other anymore. But still to this day, a Jewish reader reads poetry written by a Palestinian poet, or a novel written by a Palestinian novelist, and connects with the characters there. Or vice versa, a Palestinian reader reads a novel written by a Jewish writer and connects with the characters there. And somehow the boundaries melt down, even if for the duration of a book. And I find that very valuable. I think if we lose empathy, this world will become much, much worse. I think the tension will be much, much higher. The polarization will be much, much bigger, because we will cease seeing each other as human individuals. We will start seeing each other in terms of categories, stereotypes, generalizations. Politics very much depends on this. It depends on us versus them. It depends on the distance between us and them. As a matter of fact, it depends on the stated or unstated hierarchy between us and them. So there's a superiority attached to us versus them. I think art and literature likes to question this. For me, there is no us versus them. For me, they're only human beings. I'm interested in the human individual. And I believe this is the third reason why we read, why we need novels. In order to understand, in order to connect with the human individual, rather than with macro generalizations. Another reason why I believe in this age we need novels and stories more than ever is humor. I think it's very dangerous for a society to lose humor. Its ability to laugh, and to laugh at itself as well, at its own mistakes, at its own flaws. When things are very, very serious, when people cannot laugh aloud, when people cannot produce humor, for me that's a sign of a very authoritarian regime. I cherish humor. I cherish our ability to turn things upside down, to that kind of lightness that comes with humor. I think that's very precious, and we shouldn't lose that. Of course, together with humor, irony, satire. We need this to keep our imagination open, to keep our innovations open. So I believe humor can also come to us from books. Another reason why I believe storytelling can be necessary in this age is what I call nomadic minds. We're all born into a certain religion, ethnicity, nationality, class, family, which is, of course, it's okay. However, if we stay only in that little bubble, and if we think the rest of the world is very different than us, then I think we are making a big mistake. I do sincerely believe that in this world, if we're ever going to learn anything, we will learn it from people who are different than us, not who are exactly like us. Someone who thinks like me, who dresses up like me, who comes from a similar background, who sees the world in a similar way, is only the echo of my voice. And how creative is it to keep hearing echoes again and again and again? That's why I believe, again through stories, we hear those voices that are not the direct echoes of our own voice. Sometimes we are disturbed, sometimes we don't like, but that's okay. It's good to hear the multiplicity of voices that humanity is capable of producing. And my sixth reason for believing in stories, especially in this age, is what I call connections. Umberto Eco once said, connections are everywhere. You know, we don't need to create them. All we need is to see, because they're already out there. The Sufis said something very similar. In Sufi philosophy, many mystics said that we're all interconnected, in fact. And life is a circle. It is not a triangle. In a triangle, you can very easily find a hierarchy. Who is superior, who is inferior. In a circle, there is no hierarchy. Every point along the circle has equal distance to the center. And I like that metaphor. I like to think in terms of circles rather than triangles. And I think stories help us to think in terms of circles. So these 6 reasons, in other words, connections, nomadic minds, humor, seeing the human individual, empathy, and also imagination. These are, in my eyes, 6 main reasons why we need stories, why we need fiction, why we need novels in this age. Of course, the age we're living in has been criticized a lot by many scholars. Some intellectuals call it the pancake generation. They liken it to a pancake because, as you know, when you look at a pancake, it's very thin, yeah, but it covers every area in a pan. They say, just like a pancake, in this age, we can get information very easily from everywhere. Information covers every area. There's not a single spot that's left outside. But how deep is that information? How deep is our knowledge? How deep is the information we get from the internet, for instance? That's a matter they question. I understand the critical approach to the digital age. I understand the critical approach to internet. And the information coming with this, high technology is something that we need to be cautious about. Because I think if we end up thinking that we already know a lot about each other, we might lose our curiosity. And I think that's a danger. So that's maybe one downside. Also, when we look at the internet, we see a lot of hate speech. Yeah? Racism, xenophobia, ultranationalism. This too, I find a danger that the internet is possible of breeding. This is also a downside. However, when I look at the positive side, I think it's larger. I think it's bigger. The possibilities that this new age is bringing us is amazing. And many people around the world are waking up to this fact, especially in countries where the population is very young. Because imagine, until recently, most of the literary, cultural, or major events would be held in main cities. For instance, in Turkey, they would be held in Istanbul and maybe Ankara. And you can name a few centers around the world. But through internet, somebody living in a completely different place can connect in a town, in a village, can connect with that global discourse. I think in that sense, the internet is bringing us a more democratic and egalitarian world, or at least the possibility of such a world. And it's also, of course, helping us to build those connections. So although I do see the downside of the picture, I'm more optimistic about the possibilities that this new era is heralding, telling us. If I may wrap up, all I can say is, I think over the centuries, certain things have not changed that much, and of course some other things have changed so fast. What hasn't changed is our need, almost existential hunger and thirst for stories. We always understand life through stories. In the past, we would sit in a circle, maybe around a fire, and we would listen to storytellers. It would be more vocal. Today, we read books. So the medium has changed. Tomorrow, there will be more and more e-books. There will be more and more audiobooks. There will be more and more new technologies on our telephones. it will become easier to download hundreds of books, maybe in a few minutes. And I think that is not a threat. I think that's an amazing possibility. What remains the same is the need for stories, is the existential necessity for stories. What changes is the medium. And I think if we don't lose our global dialogue, that can be a huge potential for all of us together. Thank you.